Welcome, my name is Patrick Regan and it is so amazing to spend this time with you. Now, you've probably worked out we are outside because tonight we are talking about in the bleak midwinter. So we thought we'd come outside, we've got a few hours. It's a little bit chilly, I'm not gonna lie, but we've got our thermals on and we are definitely socially distanced. We're all in compliance with the rules. But I am so passionate about this topic and I feel really humbled and privileged to be able to do this for Spring Harvest. A number of years ago now, I wrote these two books, Honesty Over Silence and When Faith Gets Shaken. And the reason I did it is I really wanted to try and lift the lid on some of the pure theology we have around mental health. Because we all have mental health the way that we have physical health. And I was just amazed by the reaction to the books. I had so many emails, so many messages of people saying, you know what, I've been struggling. I haven't told anyone that I was struggling, particularly in church. I felt like a complete failure. People that are having suicidal thoughts that are going, actually, I found some hope. I remember one guy said that he hadn't come to church for 18 months because if he stepped inside a church, he almost had a panic attack. He said, but I'm coming tonight to hear you. And I was almost having a panic attack, worrying about him coming to church. But he was okay. And it was just an amazing reaction. And I guess the whole thing about it was that it's okay not to be okay. But after a while, I started to think to myself, you know what? I don't want people to get stuck not being okay. I want them to have the honesty to go, actually, I'm not living in denial. This is really, really tough, but I don't want them to get stuck. So in January this year, I decided to try and write a book on resilience. And January last year, forgetting where we are, I just decided to write a book on resilience. And I realized that resilience is thriving in the midst of adversity. And then COVID hit. And then George Floyd got murdered in America. And suddenly, the topic of resilience, thriving in the midst of adversity, was all I could think of. And when I started looking at resilience, everyone said to me, you know, resilience is like bouncing back. I guess we all hear about it now, don't we? When will the economy bounce back? Will the church bounce back? And I started to think, you know, I don't know about you, but I've been changed by what's happened, for good and for bad. My values have been challenged. And I read some new research that said this, that resilience is less about bouncing back and more about bouncing forward. It's not simply an elastic band that goes back into shape. And so I started researching Bible teachers, theologians, psychologists, business people, life coaching, and I was blown away by this theme. There's this one quote coming up now. It says this: more than education, more than experience, more than training, a person's level of resilience will determine who succeeds and who fails. That's true in the cancer ward. It's true in the Olympics, and it's true in the boardroom. That came from the Harvard Business Review. So we're going to look, how do we get through this really, really tough time, this really bleak winter? Now, if you went online and you asked that question, I can guarantee that you would find lots of lists. You find lists on the BBC website. You know, people often talk about exercise and diet. They tell you to keep talking, to look at what you can control versus what you can't control, which is good advice. You know, there's so much that we can't control at the moment. Self-kindness. You know, I put up on my Facebook, what's your tips for staying emotionally, mentally healthy? I had hundreds of comments. People are so creative. The human spirit is so incredible. But often when I listen to talk, when there's long lists, I tend to zone out. And so a bit like the government with their free messages, you know, stay home, protect the NHS, save lives. I guess I just wanted to try and say 3 things and to say them really, really well. And the 3 bits of advice I want to give you about getting through the bleak winter are simply this. Number 1 is go gently. Number 2 is be kind. And number 3 is stay connected. Go gently. A very famous quote. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. You see, the challenge is, at the moment, we've got to accept that life is actually really hard. And what I want you to understand is that acceptance and resignation are 2 really different things. Jeremiah 29, verse 11 is probably one of the most misquoted verses in the whole of the Bible. We've got fridge magnets, we've got T-shirts, we've got everything with this verse on. And it's, it's a great verse that's there to, often it's preached to make people feel better. But the context is amazing. The people are in exile. They feel sad, they feel lonely, they feel vulnerable, they feel rootless, they feel anxious, they don't quite know how everything's going to turn out. In fact, the book of Lamentations describes the sadness that many of them feel. And then what you see in Jeremiah 28, Hananiah comes along and goes, guess what, guys? It's going to be over. Exile is going to be over in 2 years. The problem with this prophecy, though it was a really attractive prophecy to the people, is it just wasn't true. And so Jeremiah has to write to everyone, and he says this, guys, it's not going to be 2 years, it's going to be 70 years. That's pretty hard to take. And that's all in the context of Jeremiah 29, verse 11. And he says this, you know what? In some ways, you've got to accept that this is going to be a hard situation, but it will not be wasted. He tells the people it's time now to build houses, to plant gardens. He says this in verse 5 to 7, also seek the peace and the prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Look outward. Care for people around you. You know, there's a guy called James Stockdale, and he has a theory called the Stockdale paradox. And basically, he was in a POW camp in Vietnam, and he was there for a very, very long time. And he said the people that did worse in the POW camps were the optimists. A couple of weeks ago, I had the absolute honour and privilege of interviewing Eva Chalos, who was Anne Frank's stepsister. And it was the same situation in Auschwitz. The people that did worse were the optimists. They were the ones who said, we're going to be out by Christmas. It's all going to be okay by Easter. And the people that did best were those that accepted the situation and adapted to it. Now, I'm not saying optimism is bad, but actually optimism and hope are very, very different things. You can't deny reality of what people are going through, particularly at a time like this. You know, Jim Collins, who is the author of Good to Great, talks about the Stockdale paradox. He says this, what we need on one hand is unwavering faith that you can and will prevail in the end. And at the same time, you need the discipline to confront the brutal facts as they are. We know Paul, the Apostle Paul, was a realist. 2 Corinthians 1-8 says this, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experience in the province of Asia. We are under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we have despaired of life itself. At this time, it's really important that we learn about lament, and we learn what that means. N.T. Wright says, the hard thing is for many people is we're lamenting not being able to lament. 40% of the Psalms are lament. For me, lament is like engaging with God, but in your pain. It's deciding that, you know what, I'm going to turn towards God in my pain and not away from God. I'm going to wrestle with God, a bit like Jacob did. People often say, you know, write a modern-day psalm, make it a lament. When I've done this, my psalms look like a sort of polite complaint letter, to be honest. But that's not like the psalms in the Bible. And the really interesting thing is lament is always done in the context of worship. You know, there's that incredible bit in Psalms, isn't it, saying, where the people in exile are saying, can we sing the songs of Zion in exile? And that's why I believe the spring harvest theme for this year is so prophetic and so important. How can we do this in the context of what our nation is facing? But the reality is this, if you don't lament properly, you can't forgive properly. People need to grieve, and as the church, we need to give people space for that to happen. You know, it's interesting that what often happens with grief is that we say that we go through all these different stages, don't we? And grief could be different things. You know, people have had massive losses. People have lost loved ones and family members. You know, we've got people in hospital who we really care about at the moment. Our family, me, my wife, my kids, we all had COVID, and it was horrible. We went through that fear and anxiety. People have lost their jobs. People have lost so much, their time, their routine, their health. And it's important that we lament. It was our 25th wedding anniversary the other day and my daughter's 18th, and we had all these plans lined up. And in the end, me and my wife spent our 25th wedding anniversary hiding in the cabin at the bottom of the garden, which wasn't our ideal evening, as fun as it might have been. But, you know, the fact is we've all lost something. And I think loss can come and hit us at different times. I found this analogy really, really helpful around grief, and it's actually been adopted by the hospice movement. And it was someone on social media many years ago said, if you can imagine a box, and in the box is a ball, and the ball is grief, and there's a pain button. And what happens when grief happens is that the ball moves around the box, because it's so big, it just hits the pain button all the time. Always hitting the pain button is really, really hard. And then over time, what happens is the ball gets slightly smaller, but still regularly hits the pain button. And then it gets smaller still. And maybe it doesn't hurt as much every single day, but every now and again, it will smack that pain button. Sometimes it could be months, sometimes it could be years, but it will hit that pain button and it will hurt. And, you know, and that's why sometimes I think, you know, I have good days and I have bad days. And that's okay. Another analogy is that actually the grief stays the same size, but the box gets bigger. And so it hits the pain button a lot less. But the reality is, whatever analogy you use, is life leaves scars. And I find it interesting that Jesus, in his resurrected body, had scars. There'll be scars in heaven. So my prayer is this: go gently. Go gently with yourself. Go gently with your emotions. Go gently with others. You know, the best thing I can say about that is always assume that everyone's doing their best. If you live life like you assume everyone's doing the best they can, actually you start to change. Martin Silman, he is a psychologist who spent decades studying how people deal with setbacks. And he found 3 Ps that can stunt recovery. Number 1 is personalization, the belief that we are always at fault. The second is pervasiveness, the belief that one event will affect the whole of every area of our life and for the whole of our life. And then the third P is permanent, the belief that nothing will ever change. The reality is that not everything is your fault. Coronavirus this season is affecting massive parts of our lives, but it's not affecting all of our lives. We can still love, we can still be kind, we can still text, we can still email. There's still things that we can do, and it won't be permanent. It won't last forever. So please go gently. Second thing, be kind. And I don't know who your biggest critic is. My biggest critic is me. Research tells us that we have anything between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day, and 80% of them are negative. I can be my own worst enemy. My inner critic is loud. It tells me I'm stupid. It tells me I'm not enough. It's telling me, why on earth would Spring Harvest pick you to do this talk for them? And you know what? There is nothing off limits with my inner critic. There's nowhere it won't go. The voice is always aggressive and accusing. There's no grace, there's no love, there's no kindness. It constantly compares me with other people who I think are so much more capable, so much more academic, so much more brilliant at doing what I do. The inner critic lacks compassion. I remember once I was talking to a counsellor, and the counsellor said to me, Patrick, how do you show yourself self-compassion? And I was like, no, I'm a bloke. I don't do self-compassion. I don't do baths, and I don't do candles. And she looked at me and went, I think you've totally misunderstood what self-compassion is, what self-kindness is. And what I started to realise is what self-compassion is not. Self-compassion is not the same thing as self-indulgence. In fact, many of the ways that we think show us compassion, endless pleasure, cause us more damage than good. And the self-compassion is simply this. Self-compassion is talking to yourself the way that you would talk to your friend. How would you treat a good friend who is struggling? You would treat them with encouragement, with gentleness, with tenderness, with empathy. And and that we wouldn't dream of saying to our friend the things that we say to ourselves. The word compassion means to suffer with, to be conscious of another's pain and distress. So self-compassion is having that ability to do that for yourself. It's not about being selfish at all. A good friend of mine sent me this WhatsApp, ironically, when I was having a really down day and writing one of the books. She said this: the plan is this: you do what you can, when you can, however you can, with whatever you've got. And if you can't, you can't. You rest until you can again. You give yourself kindness so your pockets are full and you can reach in and pull out a fistful to offer folks you meet along the way. Self-compassion isn't taking the easy way out. It's giving ourselves kindness so we can give kindness to others. You know, letting go of the critical voice is pretty hard. So let me offer you an alternative voice tonight. If you're someone that struggles with that inner critic, how about this? You're doing the best you can. Making a mistake doesn't mean that you're a failure. Struggling doesn't mean you're a failure. It makes you a human being. No one is perfect. It's okay not to be okay all the time. It's also okay that not everyone will like you. Everyone is allowed a bad day. You see, sometimes it's about accepting our limitations. And we're all limited. Think about it. There are only 24 hours in a day. We're limited in terms of our abilities. You know, I'm one of these people, I'm very limited with my admin ability. In fact, I sort of feel like admin is demonic, it's of the devil. But I really appreciate people who are brilliantly gifted at that. I'm limited. I'm limited in terms of my life circumstances. You know, I'm really blessed. I've got 4 kids, but I can't travel the way I used to and go and speak and do this all over the place. I've got to be there for my family at times. I'm limited because of my health. Actually, I can't run because I've got bad knees, and so I'm not allowed to. The doctor won't let me. When I was writing my new book, Bouncing Forward on Resilience, I put this quote in, which people are like, It says this: accepting our limitations are signs of maturity, not weakness. And so I want to say that if you're struggling, please ask for help. You know, there are some amazing organisations, the Association of Christian Counsellors, Waverley Abbey College. These are professional organisations who really want to offer help, and have got some amazing resources on this sort of stuff. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to others. You know, the fact is, kindness releases oxytocin, dopamine, and serotonin. And the evidence suggests that when we're kind to others, it's the best thing that you can do for your own mental well-being. I've got a lovely friend called Cherry. She lives on an estate in London. And when I moved to London, she looked after me, a lovely Jamaican lady. And a couple of months ago, in the morning, I was just praying, and I texted her, and I just went, Cherry, want you to know you are loved. Next thing, about an hour later, she rings me. She's in floods of tears. I mean, absolutely. I'm like, why are you crying? What's wrong? What's happened? And she goes, you don't realise how low I was this morning. Just to read that, just to know that someone miles away is thinking and praying for me means the world. In fact, she rang me yesterday to thank me again, even though it was like 2 months ago. And be kind. Be someone's secret angel. You know, leave food on their doorstep. Text them. Do something where you don't take any credit. Kindness changes everything. And then the last thing, be connected. I love this quote by Cheryl Richardson. It says this: people start to heal the moment they feel heard. We need to listen to one another. One of my favourite stories is of Jesus on the Emmaus Road. I find it fascinating that the day after Jesus' resurrection, he spends the morning with 2 heartbroken, disillusioned, probably really depressed people. And he goes on a journey with them. And it sort of talks to me about values and priorities. You know, I would have thought maybe after the resurrection, a marketing person might have gone, Jesus, now this is a really good time to do that sort of feeding of the 5,000 gig. You know, this is a really good time to get the message out. You are here. No, the day after his resurrection, he walks with 2 heartbroken people. And the thing is, they're sharing in their pain. And he listens. And at one point, does Jesus go, guys, stop the conversation. I'm Jesus. Da-da. It's all over. It's all good. We don't need to talk about this anymore. He listens. He listens to their story. And then he starts to tell a bigger story, the story of God And he starts to quote some of the verses in the Old Testament, which Jesus, man of sorrows, things they would have known, but they never put two and two together and realized it was him. And then it was over the meal that he got revealed who he was. And, I think that's a beautiful way of being connected. It's a beautiful way of listening. We need to hold space for people to stay connected. In Kintsugi Hope, we talk about this holding space idea quite a lot. And there's this beautiful quote that says this: what does holding space mean? It means this, that we are willing to walk alongside another person in whatever journey they're on without judging, making them feel inadequate, trying to fix them, or trying to impact the outcome. When we hold space for other people, we open our hearts, offer unconditional support, and let go of judgment and control. So often, people who have been struggling have been told it's because of their lack of faith, or they've got some hidden sin, or they need to just trust God a little bit more, as if they've never thought of that. The reality is often what people need is they need to be listened to. They need that non-judgment love, that alternative voice. And it's not about being an expert. One of the things I realised that I am not an expert. And in Kintsugi Hope, we don't claim to be experts in anything, really. And it's interesting. I know a lot of experts. In fact, I'm surrounded by experts. My trustees are experts and some of my staff. But, if you've got a friend and they've got cancer and they'll go to hospital, and you expect the hospital to give them chemo and radiotherapy, won't you? And to take care of all their medical needs. But actually, to get through a cancer journey, you need love, community, support, family. And it's the same with mental and emotional health. We cannot and should not do what the experts do. We need to support them doing what they do so well. But anyone would tell you, we have doctors, we have nurses, we have psychologists that are working with us who are saying, you know what, actually, for someone to get through this journey, they need community, they need support, they need friendship, they need people to walk alongside. 2 years ago now, in February 2018, we launched this charity called Kintsugi Hope, and I wanted to tackle two issues, I guess, I had on my heart: social isolation and poor mental health. They say that vision is the art of seeing the invisible that produces passion and energy. So what was the dream? The dream for me is I wanted to see a world where mental and emotional health is understood and accepted, with safe and supportive communities for everyone to grow and flourish. And you know what? For me, it wasn't a load of clever old words I can just stick up on a PowerPoint. Is I knew from my own journey and how I've struggled with my mental health is that when I felt understood and when I felt accepted and safe and supported, I flourished. But when those things weren't in my life, I really, really struggled. And so what we did is we basically trained churches up across the UK to run a 12-week program around emotional and mental well-being. Most of them happen in Zoom. We train the church up and they do it in their community. And it's just been incredible. It's a little bit like Weight Watchers for well-being, It's not just for like a Bible study, mental health. It's about reaching into the community, offering that sense of community. And since COVID, we've literally signed up a new partner church every single day. In fact, it's gone from being really small. Now we've got like 200 churches, over 200 churches, 600 leaders, 27 denominations. It's happening in homeless hostels and in businesses with healthcare professionals. And it's just incredible. You can see the maps here of where it was and where it is now. And I think something incredible is happening. There have been so many beautiful stories of the church reaching out. I love a story where this lovely lady, because they were doing a Kintsugi group for those that were shielding, they basically drove around their community and they made sure that some of the elderly who couldn't quite work out Zoom were on Zoom okay, and then went back and then they did the group. We've had people who've just had so much low self-esteem realise that actually they don't have to let perfect be the enemy of good. In one of the groups, we talk about this word called flawsome. I don't know if you ever heard of it. I thought it was a made-up word, I must admit. But flawsome means this: an individual who embraces their flaws and knows they're awesome regardless. How cool is that? I met someone who was really struggling with their self-esteem, and they said, I told myself that every day. They had a mobility scooter, and they weren't going out. And she said, I told myself every day, and I got on my mobility scooter, and I went out. We've had people from faith do it, people with no faith doing it. It's interesting, there's a week on perfectionism, and I heard of one group where the non-Christians said to the Christians, we just thought you were a bunch of do-gooders. But here you are talking about your weaknesses, and you've just totally changed our view of Christianity. It was a beautiful moment. And it reminds me of the whole image of Kintsugi, where basically we get a bowl, we break it, we mend it with super glue. We try and hide the cracks, and we pretend it's not broken. So what they do in Japan is they put a gold powder in the glue. So instead of hiding the cracks, they make a feature of the cracks. Arguably, the object becomes more beautiful than it was before. And I believe that our scars are not to be ashamed of, that beauty can and will come out of brokenness. I love the verses in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 7 to 9. It says this, "But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." And I don't know about you, I just really praying for a real move of God. And I know that sometimes we think that moves of God are going to happen in a big warehouse somewhere, in a massive meeting, a massive conference. And I love those things, and I think they're really important. But I was like, God, if that happens somewhere, you know, in another country, and a Christian TV station come and they put it on all our screens and we call it revival, I might quit it. I might quit. I'll be honest. I might quit. But you know what? If it could be in people's homes and in homeless shelters and in prisons and in hospitals and in pubs and in coffee shops, and if it's not led by the big and the charismatic, by the fragile and the broken and the humble and the courageous, I'm so up for seeing a move of God like that. And I believe, despite the pandemic, God's Spirit is moving and he is doing stuff. So in conclusion, I want to say to you, please go gently, be kind and stay connected. And I believe that as we do that, we can bounce forward. We can ask ourselves some of those really important questions. When I was finishing off the book, the last chapter, a really, really helpful analogy was by a guy called Patrick Regan. And he basically says this: being well and healthy is a bit like rowing a boat. Illness or other kinds of problems can be the fault of us as we crash into the rock. Most approaches to tackling difficulties tend to focus on the rocks, but the problem or the rock is only half the story. The water level represents our background level of resilience. When we're feeling good in ourselves with our emotional reserves that are high, we may float over the rocks. That on a bad day that we're going to hit, when we're feeling depleted, when our water levels are low, we're more likely to crash. Now, there's an image coming up on your screen, and what you can see there, it says resilience in the middle, and there's these rocks at the bottom, and those rocks are always there. You know, situations with our kids. You know, I love my kids. I've got 2 teenagers, and sometimes, you know, as much as I love them, you know, they can really hit back with some really cutting remarks. Other times they're just lovely and beautiful and fantastic. But if I'm on a down day, if my water level is low, man, I feel like I crash, and suddenly it's World War III at home. And so I've been asking myself the question, and we've been doing this as a team, is what are the things that raise my levels of resilience, and what are the things that push it down? And so actually, if you want a copy of this, you can email me at the Kintsugi Hope office and I'll send it to you. You can fill it in. This is my version. These are the things that push me down. Is I know if I'm not sleeping well, that is it. That it affects every area of my life. I realize that some relationships are really positive, but some relationships can be really toxic. I realize that perfectionism, that's trying to be all things to all people, pushes me down. I realize when I'm not living with purpose and I'm not living by my values, that actually that really pushes my water level down. But I realize also now that actually prayer, exercise, some of the practical things, but also safe relationships, values, purpose, they can lift it up. Kindness, gratitude. I love the phrase of gratitude, hunt the good stuff. That's what I think gratitude is. You go hunting for the good stuff. It's not easy. Hunt that good stuff and find it. I've been asking loads of people this question as I come in to finish, is what does success look like to you? What's actually really important in this phase? And I've come to the conclusion that success is living by my values, is living by the things I feel that God has put, to align my values with Christ's values, to be countercultural. It's not just what you do, it's the way you do it. Is I want to be someone that lives from those kingdom values to the people around us. You know, I got someone I know, he looks very successful, big house, lovely car, never spends time with his family and kids. It's really tough for him. And he's like, I'm not sure, actually, I would call that success. I've done well in materialism, but I want to live by the right values. And as a time, as individuals and as the church, what are our values? How do we want to be? It's not about numbers. It's not about big this and big that. It's got to be about the integrity of our heart. Man looks on the outside appearance. God looks at the heart. I really pray that this has been helpful for you. And it's been amazing for me to have the privilege. And I've loved just talking about resilience. And if you want a copy of Bouncing Forwards, I always get embarrassed by this bit. And then someone said to me, how long did it take you to write it? And it was about a year. Blood, sweat, tears, and no events to put it at. But I really believe in it, actually. I really believe in the message, thriving in the midst of adversity. How do we do that? And so if you want a copy of Bouncing Forwards, we would love to sign it and send it. And you can pre-order it. It doesn't come out till March. I don't even have a copy to show you. And I hope you really don't mind me mentioning that. And because I believe it could be really helpful. When you think about it, Paul was in lockdown at the end of his life for 2 years. And it didn't look particularly successful. But in that time, he wrote books that changed the world. Paul was someone that knew heartache. You know, when he and Silas were in Acts 16, they're praising God in prison. What I often think about that is after that, Paul was also in prison another time in other places. And you know the story. He praised God and there was an earthquake and the jailer became Christian and it was all great and everything. I reckon when he was in prison after that, he must have tried the same gig. In fact, theologians think he was probably singing the Psalms and nothing happened. Silence. He just stayed in prison. We don't often preach on that bit. And I'm like, God, can I be so committed to you? Can I lament and that you know the pain? But I'm going to praise you whether you turn up or you don't turn up. I'm going to be that person. When I was praying about tonight, I came across that verse in Revelation 21, you know, where it says, he will wipe away every tear. There'll be no more death, no more pain, no more anxiety, no more depression, no more COVID, no more cancer. It's all going. And he'll wipe away every tear. But the thing that I'd never seen before, and I don't know why, maybe I'm just not that clever, is it's just the word, he wipes away every tear. God, the maker of the universe, the almighty God, has a really intimate act. I don't know how many tears you've wiped away. I've probably wiped away my kids' tears and my wife's tears, but not many people, you just go and wipe their face, would you? But it's a beautiful intimacy that he says, in your pain, in your anxiety, I'm going to wipe away every tear. That I am with you. Go gently, be kind, stay connected, whatever you do. I want to finish with this beautiful poem. This was written by a friend of mine. It's how we finished the book, Bouncing Forwards. And basically, it's this lovely lady called Jane Smith. She's got a rare form of blood cancer. And when I said I was starting Kintsugi, she sent me this, and I absolutely love it. It says this: acceptance in the anguish, beauty in the bruises, belief in the brokenness, breakthrough in the battle, comfort in the conflict, contentment in the confusion, courage in the crisis, determination in the distress, diamonds in the dust, dignity in the disappointment, direction in the difficulty, discovery in the darkness, faith in the fear, fortitude in the frustration, grace in the grief, healing in the horror, hope in the hurt, insight in the injury, inspiration in the illness, and jewels in the journey. Go gently, be kind, stay connected. Father God, I want to pray for every single person who's listening to this, whether they're listening to it live now or whether they've just found it on YouTube or whatever, however they've got it. God, I just pray that they would know that you are Immanuel, God with us. I pray, God, that they would just know how loved they are and they won't let perfect be the enemy of good. They'll let themselves lament. They let themselves grieve. God, that they will show themselves kindness. They will show themselves compassion and talk to themselves the way they would talk to their best friend. God, that you'd help them to connect with others and to really listen to people around them, to stay connected to others and most of all to stay connected to you. Jesus, we thank you. You will wipe away every tear and we are going to be okay. Ultimately, we are going to be okay because we're loved. Amen. You might want to check this song out. This is a song called Immanuel. This is by my precious friend, Andy Flannagan, written for a time such as this. Check this out.
We do not sit alone. We do not stand alone. We do not walk alone. We do not dance alone. Unseen, unveiled. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. We do not work alone. We do not cook alone. We do not drive alone. We do not clean alone. Unmade, uncaged. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. Word made flesh, this is Jesus, present tense. This is Jesus, Word made flesh. This is Jesus. We do not eat alone. We do not sleep alone. We do not live alone. We will not die alone. Unknown, unleashed. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us there. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us here. Immanuel, Immanuel, our God is with us here.